Let me express my thanks and delight for such a kind and generous and nervous introduction. Suppose what is particularly challenging about this organization, kind of inherent in the name, is Association for a Better New York. Could have used other words, excuse me please. Could have said stronger, could have said bigger, could have said richer, could have said powerful. This point of better raises a concern about the quality of life and the quality of relationships. What must a president do? A lot of talk lately about the, thank you, qualifications. Well, be old enough, be American enough. Those are the constitutional qualifications. Beyond that, be able to shape a consensus, to be able to get a hearing from the people and convince them that you can lead them to a better and a more secure life. In this campaign, we have set a high moral tone. We pulled together family farmers and urban workers, one group fighting for fair prices, another fighting for fair wages. We pulled together the most multicultural campaign, the most diverse and effective operating coalition. Whether endorsement from El Diario newspaper in this city, or Amsterdam News, or Village Voice, or Nation magazine, there is evidence of the impact of our building a viable, credible, progressive coalition. Leaders must set a high moral tone. And I will not surrender that tone to diversion. I'm going to maintain this moral tone because it will make New York better. It will make America better. What must a president do? A president must know and obey the law. Presidents. They must convene a management team to effectively run the government on a day-to-day basis, most of whom are not elected officials. They are appointed because of areas of specialization, some track record of service. What do presidents do? They negotiate. I've negotiated with Ford Motor Company, more than 200 dealerships, Burger King, Coca-Cola, challenging corporations to open up, to expand their markets, to allow in new ideas, new people, fresh capital, allow the oxygen of the entrepreneurial spirit to come from the bottom up, not just dictates from the top down. They negotiate. They solve management labor disputes. They negotiate. If challenged, they bring Americans back home from foreign jails, but they negotiate. Leaders negotiate. They set direction, establish priorities, a foreign policy that's coherent, a foreign policy that will in fact expand our influence and bring peace in the world. But above all, remain focused. The focus of my campaign has been to stop drugs, invest in people, reinvest in America. And now the dominant issues in this campaign, the ones I established as priority prior to our, stop drugs, invest in people, reinvest in America. Prenatal care for a mother, $600. Low birth rate baby, because of lack of prenatal care, up to 20 weeks in the hospital at $1,000 a day. Invest in people. 1 year, State University of New York, $7,000. 1 year, New York jail, $21,000. 4 year full scholarship, State University of New York, less than $30,000. 4 years at Attica on a full penitentiary scholarship, $160,000. It makes better judgment to invest in Head Start, daycare and prenatal care, therefore, on the front side of life, rather than jail care and welfare on the backside. It's a matter of direction. Presidents must set direction. Of those running, I established early on that the number one threat to our national security is drugs. We've been corrupted at the borders and in government, drugs. Number one cause of crime, drugs. Fast becoming the number one transmitter of AIDS, drugs. We've gone from saying drugs is the pleasure of the rich to the scourge of the poor. But now we know a $150 billion a year drug habit is not being paid for by children, nor is that money being laundered by ball players. This drug war, this war of the opiate, is the most pervasive threat our society has ever known. I go to about 4 high schools, Dr. Green, every week. Suburban, inner city, Seattle, Washington, New York City, the heart of hour. I ask our children 4 basic questions. How many of you know someone in your age group who's dead because of drugs? About 25% always stand. If you know someone in your age group who is in jail because of drugs, about 50% always stand. You know someone in your age group who tries drugs in your school, about 90% always stand. You know someone who has considered suicide, about 60%. Westchester, Harlem, always stand. These children and drugs, some pursuing pleasure, some making money from the illicit economy, some as anesthesia for their pain. Yet perhaps the great mistake of all is to just focus on children and not focus on those who are covering for the drug pushers, who are covering for the drug warlords. You do not spend that kind of money. Don't cover billions of cash dollars by focusing on children and ball players. Senator from this state a few months ago put on street-looking clothes. People in the streets don't wear those kind of clothes anymore because they're making enough money to buy other kind of clothes. Want to look like somebody in the streets, you should have got a $900 suit and diamond rings. And went to a poor neighborhood and a bunch of cameras, a bunch of policemen, and found a drug exchange. Big news item. He could have kept on his regular suit. Went right down to Battery Park. Kept on his regular suit and went to an association of bankers. Could have kept on his regular suit and went right down the hall in the federal building. We missed the target just by focusing on children. I put forth a plan with budget numbers. Unlike my competitors, we must stop drugs at the source, have a Latin American summit meeting with those leaders, develop with them a comprehensive plan, protect the integrity of their democracies from drug lords. They're not nearly as threatened by Sandinistas as they are by cocaine, crack, heroin, PCP, and the amount of money involved. Our priorities must shift. Stop drugs at the source. Strengthen our borders. We are militarily inferior at our borders. 1.86 million worth of drugs came through the McAllen, Texas borders 3 years ago. Last year, Mayor Lindsay, 2 billion worth came through that passage. We got 1 boat, 1 helicopter, 12 horses, and now 200 cars. compared the drug lords with the latest in planes and speedboats and technique. Met with the Coast Guard officials in Miami. They know the 3 choke points where the drugs come through. In 1986, they interdicted 10,000 pounds of cocaine. In 87, they interdicted 26,000 pounds of cocaine. And then the administration cut the Coast Guard budget by $100 million. Busted the Coast Guard. Gave the drug traffickers the green light coming this way. Why not use 30 or 40 ships in our naval operation under the auspices of the Coast Guard and strengthen our borders as deterrents? As deterrents. As defense at our borders. Rehabilitation. Heroin addict can come up right now and say, I'm on heroin, I want to get well. He or she must stand in line 6 to 8 months to get treatment. Heroin addict steals an average of $34,000 worth of goods a year and kills X number of people. Educate our children in their formative years. Don't just say no, convince them. The death option and the life option. As president, I put major emphasis on stopping a flow of drugs that's now a factor in foreign exchange and a factor in daily death every day in our cities. As president, I could stop the supply substantially because I want to. But the demand must be stopped by the people. It's a government-people partnership. Eyes on the crisis of drugs. Housing. New York City is the #1 slum landlord in New York City. The abandoned buildings. I'm going to Hilton Hotel when I leave here. People's paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month for a room. Common bathroom. Common eating facility. In New York, the home of investment bankers, the Mecca of Western capital. We cannot think of a way to build houses in New York. That's why we cannot focus on the diversion. Surely in New York, $600 billion in public pension funds, about 10% roughly, about $6 billion a year over a 10-year period. Government secured fair rate of return guaranteed. City got vacant buildings, vacant properties. Offer some land, it has no better use than housing. The state can give some tax breaks. Leverage that money over a 10-year period. It may be leveraged out at $100 billion. Between 86 tax bill on the one hand and the deficit on the other, is almost the only source of capital available. We got the minds in the room, but great minds must work on great ideas. I challenge you today, with investment bankers here, Frank Borges here, Treasurer of the Connecticut, and Donald Trump, I challenge you this day. Don't just vote for me and do that because it makes sense, but do a better thing. Let's rebuild New York. Let's rebuild New York. You look at today's papers, you would not think that the Williamsburg Bridge is closed and small businesses are suffering on both ends of the bridge, or that there are 31 closed bridges in New York. Out of the bridges closing in America every other day, another bridge is closing. We've ignored maintaining our bridges in this city, or reinvesting in building bridges. How do you put iron workers and steel workers back to work? Engineers, inspectors, construction workers, painters, except to reinvest in our infrastructure? It does not make sense to me to double the military budget in peacetime, spend $150 billion a year defending Europe and Japan 42 years after the war, while they now have creditor status, we have debtor status. They're paying 20% less of their share of the burden 7 years later, while bridges are falling, and people are falling and school walls are collapsing, we must change our priorities and make sense. We have the terrorists in Europe, we have the fence in Europe, but our school walls are falling down on our children in New York. The paint is peeling on the walls in New York. AIDS epidemic exploding in New York. There's been no cry out from leadership. So now that you have the caucus and go in town, what is your urban policy for New York? There's been no express concern that leaders address ways to build housing, support for those trapped by AIDS, motivate our children, reinvest in urban America. Leadership has diverted attention away from that which is real. I challenge you this day. Make this a better New York. Not diversion and deflection and reflection, but an agenda that makes sense. Lastly, foreign policy has its place, but domestic policy is first. It has its place, but defense begins at our own borders and then abroad. Common defense, yes, but domestic tranquility comes from justice at home. Foreign policy, then discussion. We must first have a view of the world. I know the world better than my opposition. Traveled in more of it. Met with more of its people. Have a sense of our options. I have a doctrine. All the talk about Jesse has charisma, yeah, that's one of my gifts. I also think well on my feet. I'm the only candidate who's put forth budget numbers for building affordable housing. Numbers. A plan for building housing. A budget to fight the war on drugs. Not just a hand wave. A plan for a 5-year budget deficit reduction. Foreign policy. We're a great nation. But Fulbright reminded us that we should be against the arrogance of power. Because arrogance precedes the fall of any great nation. Just being arrogant. English only. We're 1/3 of this hemisphere. 2/3 of our neighbors, our allies, our potential customers speak Spanish and Portuguese in the main. English only, it's a step backwards. Any good business person wants to speak the language of their customer. English only, in a growing, expanding America. We should be thinking about reducing the debt in Brazil and Mexico. As that debt comes down, our deficit will come down. I see 400 million, not potential communists, I see 400 million potential customers, allies, neighbors. I see exporting grain and tractors and medicine and rail and infrastructure and telecomputers to 400 million customers right down the Pan-American Highway. I have another vision of Latin America. What are the policy guidelines? Respect and strengthen international law and know it. Secondly, support human rights. Thirdly, support self-determination. 4, as we did for Europe, economic development. An overt economy, if not, we'll end up an illicit economy as we now have with drugs, and be consistent. In South Africa, we should stop playing with apartheid. We're either against it or we're not. And if we're against it, there are ways to end it. Negotiate and think. Get South Africa out of Angola and Namibia, and then Cuba out of Angola. Build a berry corridor out of Mozambique and the Limpopo Railroad. Free up Zimbabwe and Zambia. What does it do for us beyond the morality of the matter? Once that happens, then South Africa no longer has hegemony on resources in the region. We should not be bound in a relationship to 4 million Afrikaners and miss 100 million potential customers, allies, with whom our future rests. Last, at the Middle East. We can't reinforce a failed policy and win. The present policy has failed. It has failed all involved. Today, the crisis has deepened. 17 Palestinians dead. Our sense of morality would make us cry out for a sense of mercy. Another PLO leader dead. That does no service to peace. We can gain no joy from people dying. Israelis and Palestinians are both trapped. They're trapped in a death grip. Neither can turn the other loose. There is no security in the present formula. Occupation is too great a burden to bear. Politically, it is divisive. Economically, it is costly. Economically, it's inflationary and you cannot grow. Emotionally, it is draining. Militarily, it's bloody. We must think of a way out. What can we do? What can we do? We can pry them loose and do for both of them what neither can do for the other. Convince them of the advantages in peace. Not by threatening to cut off aid, but by offering sweetness, by offering alternatives beyond war. Land for peace. Talk for no talk. Thinking for not thinking. Expansion as contrasted with hysteria. But talking and acting and making things happen. Leaders must do a harder thing than agree. We must convene the affected parties. I suppose one reason I'm driven on the subject, beyond the needs for America's interests to be secure, is I know that we can and should fight for Israel to have secure borders. Support UN Resolution 242. That's the right thing to do. You can guarantee secure borders, but you cannot guarantee tranquility and occupation because they are antithetical. And thinking people know that. And courageous people say that because it's the right thing to say. It's the right thing to say. We don't need to be president and ordinary politician. We need a leader who has the courage of his convictions and sees a way out. I see a way out. I see a way out. I've been too poor to afford the luxury of cynicism. I'm hopeful. I see a way out. There is a way out. I know there's a way out. I see Israel beyond that war, beyond the war, beyond occupation, having ties with its Arab neighbors, having ties with its African neighbors. I see Israel growing, expanding, become the real water hole in the desert beyond the war, becoming the Hong Kong of the Middle East beyond the war. We must see beyond the war and the walls. There's a way out. I know there's a way out. I'll talk now, Dr. Green, about subclass, underclass, subculture. I understand it real good. I'm a member of it, graduate of it. Born to teenage mother. 3-room house. Wallpaper not for decoration but for wind breaking. Bathroom on the back porch, I understand. There's a way out. Couldn't buy a blanket, grandma had to make a quilt to keep warm. Slept with a brother on the cot till I was 12, I understand. Never stayed in the house with my father a night in my life. Adopted, got my name at age 12. I really do understand. Born in Islam, but it was not born in me. We need a leader who can conquer the difficulties of life and make America better. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Whatever you say, as long as you
Thank you. The Reverend Jesse has agreed to answer as many questions as we have time for. So whoever stands up, please, straight ahead.
You said earlier that you were going to the Hilton Hotel. That's hotel. You will see a portion of the 60,000 homes that our city is missing here in New York. There is need for immediate relief of this kind of thing. I think your program for housing will work, but what might we do immediately to relieve the suffering of those who are in the hotels here in New York City?
First of all, we need to immediately sit with people who can think it through and work out a formula that will allow some flexibility in the investment of the money. It does not make sense to have to be able to spend $2,000 to $4,000 a month for a room and not be able to use that same money in building a house or refurbishing a brownstone. For that amount of money, you can stay in one of Trump's places. That kind of money. Serious money. That's $4,000 a month. My point is, let's think for a moment. It does not make sense to spend that kind of money in a cost-ineffective way. Why can't people who live in there have the option? Talk about vouchers. Why can't they have the option to use that money to get in an affordable house? We have the need for housing. The market is right. We have the vacant property. We have the abandoned buildings. Change the formula in terms of the flexible use of the money. Secondly, begin immediately. Why can't we get Frank Borges? Why can't we get Felix Royalton, the best minds we know, to work out a formula between the pension funds, government security, and targeting areas where the houses can go or be refurbished? I see right now relief, but we need right now leadership whose focus it is housing.
Mr. Jackson, having heard your platform, I'm convinced that you are best to be president. My question is, after the Democratic Convention, if you, by chance, happen not to be chosen as the Democratic candidate, will you be on the ballot for President of the United States?
Well, obviously, if I win the nomination, I will choose a running mate. That's option A. B, if I do not win it, the option for the running mate is that of the nominee. But my priorities are this. One, consistent with my life's work, my first priority is to A, make America better. I've done that for all of my adult life. Secondly, because we must protect our national interests first. To enable our party to win, that's the second challenge. The third is to play a role in making that happen. If our priorities are nation first and party second and your role third, if we maintain that perspective, then we will win. To me, that becomes critical for us, that we win.
Candidate Jackson, my name is Bill Pickett, a New York businessman. Two-part question. Number one, I've heard little discussion on the missing in action problem in Asia. I'm a former Air Force officer, and I'm deeply concerned about that. I'd like you to share your views on that. Two-part. Second part, there's a lot of discrimination on the campuses of leading very expensive private universities around this country, which has come to the fore. I'd like you to comment on what you think the reason for that is, and what you as president would do to combat that kind of virulent racism present on these campuses.
First of all, on the MIAs, I've met with the people in Asia, including the North Korean ambassador. We'll probably go sometime before this year's out to North Korea. No doubt on a humanitarian mission, either to try to get remains or try to get some prisoners who still may be alive. We don't know. They still may be alive. I'm willing to engage in the same type pursuit of Americans who still may be in Vietnam. It is a struggle that we cannot cease to engage in until all of us are relieved, and I have the full knowledge that either our service people or their remains are back home. I will do that. Your second question, racism on campuses. First of all, racism tends to be abated when leadership lifts the people's perspective above racial insecurity. Leadership. President Reagan, excuse me, last 7 years has not met with the Congressional Black Caucus one time in 7 years. And the news media does not see that as outrageous, and therefore accept it as standard normal behavior. and that's bad. All the talk about who I would meet with in New York in the course of 10 days, he has not met in 7 years with the Congressional Black Caucus. When there was a bipartisan meeting on drugs, the most knowledgeable congressman in the Congress on the drug flow with the best proposals, Charlie Rangel, was locked out of the White House. Was locked out of the White House. He tried not to honor the King holiday and then suggested that Dr. King was a communist 18 years after he was dead, a Christian theologian. He suggested in South Africa that those who had been shot were the provocateurs. This kind of behavior is not good for America. When Mr. Reagan opened up his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, a place without an airport, without a major interstate highway, known only because that's where Sterling Goodman and Chain of 2 Jews and a black were found killed in 1963, and made a speech that attracted the endorsement of the Klan, though he rejected a month later. The signal was sent and the die was cast. From Philadelphia, Mississippi, to laying a wreath at Bitburg, to not putting sanctions on Johannesburg, is a straight line. That shadow has been cast across the nation. We deserve better leadership to set a moral tone for our nation. When Lyndon Johnson came in after John Kennedy was killed, we had great fears. Kennedy said all of the right and good things, setting a climate, and here came Johnson with his past record. And Johnson began to talk about great society, in effect saying to his southern peers, it's a new day, let's go a new way. There were almost no racial attacks in the most traumatic transition because a leader gave light. In the city, leaders must not shout fire in darkness, they must provide light in darkness and lift the people's spirit above racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism.
I'm a homeowner in Harlem, where you may be aware that 70% of our property has been seized by the city of New York due to the lack of taxes. And this comes about by rent control. When you become president, Mr. Reverend Jackson, we are pleading to you to free us from rent control. This is what has caused a lot of homeless in the city of New York. You may not be aware of it, but we as homeowners are the ones who are making this great function in New York City of providing renting houses. Unless something is done about rent control, we are going to have more homeless in New York City, because when the city takes our property, there is no revenue that is coming in due to taxes. I am one of the landlords who is very diversified in my function, and most landlords, we also provide decent housing and employment for people who are self-employed. And I would like you to take a look at what I'm saying today about rent control, which is destroying Harlem on a whole. Thank you.
Earlier this year at the breakfast for Governor Dukakis, this Jim Morton at St. John the Divine.
Small church up on.
Earlier this year at the same breakfast for Governor Dukakis, I asked him his opinion on what seemed to be a galloping growth of the, quote, underclass in America, and I asked him to evaluate Felix Rohatyn's suggestion of several years ago of having a domestic urban Marshall Plan for our cities. His reply was, it's un-American to use the word underclass. I'd like your response to that.
There is an underclass. There's a subculture. There's an illicit economy. We must face the truth. There's an underclass. There's a cycle of poverty. a cycle of homelessness, unemployment, inadequate education, growing illiteracy, a threat to productivity, a cycle of babies making babies and pain feeding upon pain. So one cannot have a good urban policy if one does not first analyze the nature of the urban policy. So that's a way out. Education is a way out. We must invest in education for education to be the way out. Jobs, a way out. But you must provide jobs to have a way out. This city is not maintaining its bridges, nor is our government in partnership with cities investing in infrastructure. There are ways out. But those who are locked in that cycle are depending upon lottery and luck to get out, or they surrender to inevitability that they cannot get out. There is an underclass. There is a subculture. There is an illicit economy. And at this point, we have no vision to break it up. I want to break it up. I came out of it. I understand it real well. And your work, of course, fighting to focus on the homeless, is a step in the right direction. But I repeat again today, of all the talk, and I thank Governor Cuomo for saying we had content, no one running or either party has a plan to build houses, a plan to break the cycle, a plan to reduce our budget deficit in 5 years, a plan. You know and I know that you could freeze the military budget at its present spending level. Just freeze it. Don't stop it. No irrational cuts, no unilateral cuts. Just freeze it. We'll still have the strongest armed forces in the world in 5 years and be saving $60 billion a year. Star Wars will not make us more secure. Keep the research. We don't need to deploy Star Wars. You know the top 600,000 individuals can pay the 38% income tax bracket rather than 28%. That's about $25 billion a year. We have a merger and acquisition fee. It's about $10 billion. We can come out, the whole of us come out the way we got into it. I have a plan to come out. I'll reach out to you to be my partner in that process.
We have time for one more question. I know Stuart had a question. Stuart Shiftel.
Do you think the drug situation, the legalization of some drugs or all drugs would help the present situation?
To me, to legalize drugs is to surrender to the drug war. I do not want to legalize drugs. If you legalize drugs, who's going to administer them? You can buy heroin or coke up to what point? To the point of joy? And then what about the drug to bring you out of despair? And then do you get enough drugs to get overdose? I mean, at what point do you stop legalizing poison? Simply poison. I am willing to fight the flow of drugs and fight the demand for drugs. Thank you, friends.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think the best answer for all of us, Jesse's coming back up, is for everyone to vote tomorrow. That's very important. And one last word.
I'm sorry, at the very end, I almost forgot it. One of the ultimate oversights is we've been working such a hard schedule. My wife got back in late last night from Pennsylvania and had to oversleep today. But my wife, Jackie, just came in. Jackie, come up here, please. Our entire family's campaigned so hard. My wife, Jackie Jackson. There's Rachel.
I have to tell you, I was on the fence, and after today, I'm not unconventional. If you can accomplish what you say you're going to do, I'll feel so much better for my children, for my grandchildren.
Man, you should have announced. You should have announced that.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll continue our coverage of the campaign activity leading up to tomorrow's primary election in the state of New York in just a moment.